Hi, happy Cinco de Mayo, firefighters. And let's take a moment to remember Mexico's fierce resistance against French colonialism and those who fought and died to protect their country and families. Yeah. Sorry, we kept you waiting a few minutes. We were having a few technical glitches. Everything's worked out now. I'm so happy to see you. Thank you for joining Fire Drill Fridays. And wherever you're watching, drop your name and where you're joining in from in the comments. I love hearing from you. I love knowing where you're from. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family, where we're building community, learning about the climate crisis and taking action to address it. You can see lots of ways to take action and get involved at Fire Drill Fridays, plural, firedrillfridays.com/take action. We have a great show in store today. It's our spring 2023 book club, and we're talking with author Arlie Hochschild about strangers in their own land, anger and mourning on the American right. It's the story of her journey into Louisiana Bayou country to understand the American far right, specifically to understand their relationships with environmental pollution. And lucky for us, we have special guest, General Honoré, a decorated lieutenant turned environmental activist who's featured in the book. But before we dive in, I got some good news, very good news. Now to the topic of the day. Okay. Well, one good piece of good news is that Greenpeace was facing a $100 million suit around Standing Rock. It's called a SLAPP suit, and it's an attack on democracy. It says you can't protest, you can't raise your voice against fossil fuel infrastructure, and they won. They beat a $100 million lawsuit, which would have set a terrible precedent. This is really a big deal. So we should all be very happy about that. Now to the topic of the day. I read this incredible book, Strangers in Their Own Land, as soon as Trump got elected, because I wanted to understand why and how that happened. I mean, seriously, who were these millions of people in this country that voted for him? I couldn't understand it. I knew that writing them off was bad. They're not stupid people. They're not lazy, or it's lazy or dangerous to write them off. We have to understand why this happened, what made them do this, and really listen to them. I mean, these are people who live in what used to be bedrock democratic parts of the country. Now I've read it again, and I'm so happy. I'm so happy I did, because I got even more out of it the second time. This is a really important book. It's fascinating. It's very moving. It's very clear and personal. And it's like a blueprint for how you talk to people who are on a completely different political, ideological value spectrum than you are, with honesty, with respect, and with empathy. That part is critical. If we can't understand where people are coming from across the political spectrum, how can we build a big enough movement to win this fight against the climate crisis? We need a big tent, and we need to do it with love and empathy. So we need to understand. And that's what Arlie gives us with her book. It's just mind-boggling. And it's such a brave thing she did. This is a progressive professor of sociology in Berkeley, and she takes it upon herself to go to Louisiana to what she calls scale the empathy wall and look around at the view from the other side of the American political divide. And she helps us do it with her. It's so easy to villainize, but over the years, and I've said this before, I've learned to hate behaviors, but not the people. You know, you never know how people have been raised, what they've been taught, what kind of environment they grew up in, what led them to believe what they believe now. You know, I really think that expression, and I'm paraphrasing, you can't really know another person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. So again, you can't hate or disregard the people, but you can hate the behavior and try to do something about it. We all have to understand each other. We have the ability, we have the right to stand strong in our beliefs, to fight for them, and still have an open mind and open heart to understand the messy humanness, right, in each of us. We don't need to argue. We don't need to agree either. We don't have to compromise our lives or our values, but we can listen, right, and try to understand. Listening with your heart. I learned this when I lived in Georgia for 20 years. And I'm so grateful I did, because living there taught me to listen with my heart. I often came upon people who really believe diametrically opposed to what I believe, but it was important to understand why and where that belief came from, and to feel empathy towards those beliefs. Arlie is a genius at this, and I can't wait for you to hear from her directly. But, you know, the other reason that I think this book is so important is because it sheds light on the deeply serious harm being done in the Gulf South. I mean, the book really took on new meaning as I read through it a second time, with 7 years of additional movement experience, including canvassing in Ohio and San Diego and the Central Valley of California, all heavy with MAGA supporters. Arlie investigates some of the most egregious examples of industry poisoning the air, the water, the land, the people, and tries to figure out why many of the people affected, many of the people whose family members down generations have died because of the toxic fumes that they live in, why are they balking at the idea of strengthening environmental regulation? It's extremely difficult to wrap your mind around this paradox, but we must understand if we hope to change things, and we have to change things. Oil and gas companies are recklessly expanding oil and gas exports across the already lethally polluted Gulf Coast, fueled by an oil boom in West Texas of epic proportions. That part of Texas and New Mexico is called the Permian Gulf, the Permian Basin. And our whole planet literally depends on us figuring out how to stop this expansion of oil and gas in the Gulf region, mostly for export. But we're on one planet, so if it's burned here or somewhere else on the planet, it doesn't matter. This is one planet, one blanket of pollution that is surrounding us that we have to stop adding to. And then General Honoré, he's going to tell us more about current environmental justice fights in the Gulf and how we can support them. That's going to be later in the show. And now let's get to it right away, because I have so many questions that I'm dying to ask. We want your questions too, please. So post your question in the comments now or anytime during the show. And not only will you have a chance to get that question answered by our wonderful guests, but your name will be entered for a chance to win a free copy of the book, Strangers in Their Own Land, signed by the author, Arlie Hochschild, and myself. On to the best part. I get to speak with author Arlie Hochschild of Strangers in Their Own Land. The subtitle is Anger and Mourning on the American Right, which was a National Book Award finalist and the New York Times bestseller. Her other books include The Second Shift, The Time Bind, The Managed Heart, and So How's the Family? Welcome, Arlie.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's a real honor to be here.
I'm grateful that you've joined us. And to start off, I'm curious why you wanted to go into the Bayou country of Louisiana and write this book. What were you thinking and feeling when you set off on this journey?
You know, it was a long journey. And when I began it, before I began it, I'd heard about the rise of the tea Party, and there was talk of abolishing the federal government, the whole Environmental Protection Agency, public education. I mean, there was just, it sounded unbelievable to me, crazy. Here I was, championing Family and Medical Leave Act. And I thought, look, everything my life has been devoted to would go down the tubes if this movement got bigger. And of course, this was a pre-Trump group in Congress. So that made me think, okay, the coast is clear. I just retired from teaching. I thought, well, I want to really write a book about something important. This is important. Let me dive in. I didn't know any Tea Party people, even any, hard-nosed Republicans, actually. I felt in a bubble. I thought I've got to get myself into an equal and opposite bubble. Where would that be? That would be in the South. Well, where in the South? How about the super South? Okay, that's down to Louisiana and Mississippi. And I knew one person in Louisiana, the mother-in-law of a former graduate student of mine in the environment. So he said, well, why don't you go and, make a visit? So that's how it actually began.
You focus on environmental pollution as a what you call keyhole issue to understand the American right, and specifically unpacking what many have seen as a paradox in far-right ideology. Can you explain what you mean by the great paradox?
Yeah, I wondered how it could be that across the whole nation, it's the poorest states, the states with the most environmental degradation, with the worst education, the worst medical care, the lowest life expectancy by 5 years. It's those states, highest crime rate, drug rate, poorest states, who are also the states that receive more money from the federal government in aid than they give to it in tax dollars, and who revile the federal government. Oh, well, why? Why aren't you grateful? You've got all these problems to fix. Why wouldn't it be good to get some federal help in doing that? So that is the red state paradox. And it turned out that Louisiana is the second poorest state in the whole country and one of the very most contaminated. Was very against regulating the contaminators. That seemed to me to, if I could figure this one out, then maybe we could figure out the larger one.
And you talk about the deep story that underpins the experience of those on the far right. Tell us what the deep story is.
Right. Beyond kind of opinions, you think this, I think that. There, I think, is the world of feeling. It's the world as you feel it is. And I felt I had one and they had another. And I would have to take my alarm system off, really open up to all the clues that were apparent, and see if I could step into their shoes and see how things felt to them, then explain why they feel, but stop for a moment at how it feels. So a deep story, you take moral precepts off, you take beliefs off, you just look at how things feel. And I told it as a metaphor. And I listened keenly, I made up this story, then I went back to them. What is this? Does this ring bells? Tell me where it's wrong. Is this how you feel? So the deep story is you're waiting in line. At the end of the line is the American dream. And you feel like you've been waiting a long time. And you're a good person. You don't hate anyone. You just want to get to the American dream. But one guy told me, oh, I haven't had a raise in 10 years. So you feel like Your feet are getting tired. The line is not moving. In a second, moment to the deep story, looks like they're line cutters. Well, who are they? They're women, half the population, are now supported with affirmative action programs. If they want to go ahead, they can do that. African Americans, immigrants, refugees, well-paid political officials in the government. You think of them as line cutters. And in another moment of the deep story, you see there's Barack Obama, Democratic president, who seems to be waving at the line cutters. Oh, they're his, he is them. There's an alliance ahead of me, getting in the way of my getting the American dream. And then in a final moment of the deep story, there's a guy ahead of you. You, by the way, are not looking at the miles behind you. You're only looking at the distance between you and the American dream ahead. And there is a guy ahead of you, better educated, more well-spoken, richer. And he turns around and says, you ignorant, Southern, backward, racist, homophobic, sexist redneck. And then you think, okay, that is it. The game is off. I'm already behind and they're pushing me further behind. I went back to people with this, and one guy, the general, whom we'll meet, knows very well, said, oh, I lived your story. Another one said, you read my mind. Another said, no, you didn't carry it far enough. The people that are waiting are paying taxes for the people who are cutting ahead. And another one said, we just get out of line. We secede. So they corrected my story. But they said, yeah, that's our deep story. And then they asked, well, what's yours? And we have one too.
I guess we all have a deep story, right?
We do.
Yeah. But, one of the things that impressed me as I read your book was how hard these people were. These are hard-working people.
Yeah.
And they're honest, right? And they do what they believe is right. And, one can understand, I've done everything right. I followed the rules. I live right. I'm churched. And yet still I can't get there because everybody's being given a free hand.
That's what they think. That's right. And a lot of the most ardent Trump supporters are what I would call the elite of the left behind. They're not abjectly poor. They may have even a college education, but they feel that their whole region is going down, and they with it.
I think that one important lesson here is also understanding that the great paradox and deep story didn't just pop up from nowhere. I mean, the core narrative behind this, as I understand it, was crafted by powerful interests in the Nixon era, and then systematically and diligently repeated and amplified for the last 40 years. Can you tell us more about your understanding of how this deep story came to hold so much power in people's lives?
Yes, this is the most important question. I think there's a regional story and a national story. The regional story is Nixon's Southern strategies, appealing to racial fear among whites in the South and to pull them into the Republican Party. And that was, in a way, pulling the plug on the Democratic Party, which has now lost the white blue-collar class. The working class has lost it. They're mostly Republicans now. When I grew up, that wasn't the case.
Me too.
And what the national story is that if you, and we don't think about this, but it's economic, that these two parties, the Democrats, the Republicans, are two economies. And the blue states, the Democratic states, tend to be urban, tend to attract college-educated people, and they are working in new industries that are less vulnerable to automation and offshoring, whereas blue states focus on older industries and high school educated population, often rural and semi-rural, and they they're poor. So both the national story is these two parties are different economies. Not only is one richer and the other poor, but there's more opportunity. The Democrats are in forging ahead parts of the country, and the Republicans are in sinking down, are not moving up parts of the country. So if you compare Republican Democratic congressional districts, that's what you'll find. And you also will find this this economic divide cuts into culture, and that the red states are kind of more rural, where things change less quickly. They're more traditional, and blue states less so. So I think that what happened is this is the backdrop, and globalization kind of advantaged the blue states, disadvantaged the red states, and gave them different vantage points on the American dream.
Do you think if like in Cancer Alley, in the places where there's such a high concentration of petrochemical plants and so forth, what if President Biden started building wind farms or solar farms in that area, so that suddenly there was another alternative kind of job that you could have? Do you think that would make a difference? Would that change?
Yes, I do. I think there's a real opening here. First of all, that Biden's latest big package, national package of the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to help red states a whole lot more than it will blue states. And if you look at where renewables have already caught on, a lot of them are in red states. I think South Dakota has the highest proportion of electricity from renewables. Well, that's a red state. Texas is leading in wind. Well, that's a red state. Florida, North Carolina are solar states. Iowa, Oklahoma, and wind. So you're not going in saying, hey guys, I've got a new idea. And I know this is just blue good news, want to share with you red news. No, they're already on it. And actually, if you look at recent opinion polls, and you don't look at the people I've been talking to on the extreme, you look at moderate Republicans, there's been a movement so that today, if you compare all Republicans and all Democrats on a variety of issues, such as, is there climate change? Are we suffering from it? 85% of Democrats, 54% of Republicans. Yeah, there's a problem. Should the government do something about it? Same thing, a majority, almost all Democrats, but over half of Republicans, again, would say, yes, here's an item, for example, question in this survey. Should the U.S. set strict carbon dioxide emissions limits on existing coal-fired power plants to reduce global warming and improve public health, even if the cost of electricity would likely increase? Answer, 87% of Democrats, 56% of Republicans. So I think if we go in the right manner, that in a way, they're ready for this. They want to put in a grant application to the federal government for this. I've been doing my recent research actually in Kentucky, where a lot of cut off mountains, they went in to get coal out of it, just chop the top of the mountain. And people are saying, gosh, maybe that solar panel could be put up there. So, I think that the way is opening for this, but it has to be done in a non-judging, non-finger pointing way. None of us like to be shamed, but let's do this together for a common cause. There's even something called the Green Tea Party, and the evangelicals have, through belief in God, are environmentalists. They're doing it differently. Hey, we're against mountaintop removal for the unborn child. Okay, that's for them, the meaningful thing, but it gets a solar panel up there. We have to be pragmatists.
Arlie, I have more questions for you, but I know that our friend, the General Honoré, has to leave to catch a plane in a little while. So I'm going to come back to you in a minute. And I thank you so much. I know we've just scratched the surface of a series of very juicy topics. But we're also going to have audience questions, so don't go away. And please, those of you listening, if you have questions for Arlie, please put them in the comments now. And as a bonus, anyone who asks a question will be eligible to win a copy of Strangers in Their Own Land, signed by Arlie and myself. And now we're going to go to our second guest, who I'm excited and honored to have on the show. General Russel Honoré is a decorated 37-year Army veteran and a global authority on leadership, disaster management, and climate preparedness. As the commander of Joint Task Force Katrina, he became known as the Category 5 General for his leadership in coordinating military relief efforts in the post-Hurricane New Orleans. A Louisiana native, he founded and currently leads the GreenARMY, a coalition of environmental experts and advocates to protect against pollution while fighting climate change and the natural disasters it causes. Welcome, General Honoré. Thank you so much for being here.
It's good to be with you, and thanks for all the great work y'all do with Greenpeace. You've made a difference, and you continue to make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks for your work with GreenARMY. First, I'm so interested to learn, how did you go from being a decorated lieutenant general in the U.S. Army to leading the GreenARMY of Louisiana? Were you always interested in environmental justice, or was there a moment when you changed course?
Well, it goes to my second day in Katrina. I took a Navy helicopter out to USS Baton to visit the captain of the ship and to coordinate logistics. And as I was flying out, I saw these streaks out in the Gulf, and I asked the pilots, I said, what is that? And they said, well, General, those are tipped over oil platforms. And I took a deep breath, because I know the task ahead of us to evacuate the city of New Orleans, we could do that. We can do logistics. But what I feared, and chill bumps went over my arm, was this will be devastating to the Gulf. I mean, there were dozens of them that had tipped over, and the oil was just streaking into the Gulf. I'll always remember that moment. Then years later, I moved back to Louisiana, and then we had the BP oil spill. And they lied, they covered it up, and in many ways, the administration let them off the hook because they were too big to fail. And because much of the British Empire had the retirement funds in the BP, they were allowed to continue to operate. And when we fined them some $7 billion, BP got to write that payment off in their tax in the United States. So it was a big gain with the power of the oil and gas industry. And no, by the way, BP was providing the oil and gas in Iraq. That was all part of a master plan, and that the people in our Gulf Coast was suffering as a result of it. Thus, I created the GreenARMY to help the people in Bayou, which was a red community, Tea Party community, who called me for help. They knew who I was. I was kind of still am apolitical. It's about the issues. It's about what's happening to our climate. Those Tea Party people with a red state governor who would not help them because he had taken money from the company that had caused the incident at Bayou. And I went down and met him, and we created a trust bond that this was about the pollution. It was not about what brand of politics, because the animals died, they had lost their homes, and they had nowhere to turn, and nobody would help them. So we went in and provided some assistance to them, gave them a national voice, brought the national media in, and blew this thing up so they could get some justice. And then we had a law passed in the Louisiana legislature the following year that if you have to move because of pollution, then you have to be paid replacement value of your home, as opposed to what happened to the people in Bayou. So it's an honor to be here with you, but it's about finding solutions for pollution.
Right.
I don't go into these red communities and talk about climate change. I go in and talk about pollution because that is the common ground. There are places that they can't hunt anymore, and they can't farm, and their wells are poisoned because of pollution. The common ground is to talk pollution, not climate change.
Right. That's very, very, very good advice. Thank you very much. General, with your background, you must be acutely aware of climate change, not only as an environmental issue, but as an issue of safety and security. Can you tell us more about that side of the issue, the safety and security?
Safety and security. Climate change is a national security issue. Because of the impact it's having on droughts and floods and the competition for water around the world, rising sea levels in the littorals out in the Pacific, there will be islands that will have to be evacuated. Our East and West Coast Navy will need a complete makeover because of sea level rise.
Right.
It is a major issue. We will never get action on climate change until the Senate change is over. There's an old African proverb where this chief cut a notch on a wall, and he said, no one will learn to read that's taller than this. We have to make that analogy. Until we get the average age in the Senate to be less than 45, nothing will change on policy. Every president from Bush 1 on has tried to do something about climate, and nothing's happened because the Senate is owned by the oil and gas companies. It's going to take the tales of time and retirements and death to change the United States policy on climate change, which is to recognize it, and it needs to be resourced. And I wrote a piece last year that we need a Secretary of Climate in the United States that bring all the agencies together, just like we have a Secretary of Defense, because climate is an existential threat to our country and to the world because of the impact that pollution is having and the global impact of the warming earth, the high waters. Louisiana will lose much of south of Interstate 10 because of rising tides associated with warming sea levels and the rising of the Gulf. To include Florida, much of Florida now will have sunshine tides that are flooding streets in Miami. This is a real issue that we need to deal with. We've got to cool the earth down, and it comes down to ending pollution.
I love that you feel this urgency, General. You're absolutely correct. We have to get more people to feel the urgency. But I want to say we don't have to wait for those oil bought off elected officials to die or grow old and retire. We can vote other people in. That's what I'm doing. We're voting climate champions in and don't vote for anybody that takes money from the fossil fuel industry. We have to explain to people the importance of finding out where these people get their support from. The number one objection that people have to doing what we know we have to do, right, to ensure safe and livable planet and future, the one is jobs. You know, people are worried about jobs. In the book, Arlie talks with you about how the perception of how many people in the oil industry, how many people the oil industry employs in Louisiana. It's they think it's a lot bigger than it really is. It's actually not so big. And that comes at a huge cost in terms of government giveaways. Can you tell us what is the reality and how can we make sure working people are taken care of while transitioning off fossil fuels?
Well, we need to get some more of that investment money that the Biden administration invested in the red states. Much of that money is going to the the Battleground States. We need some of that to expand the non-fossil fuel industry. Where did all the chip factories go? We could build chips in Louisiana. Where did all the money go for the data centers? They didn't come to Louisiana or to Mississippi. We need some of that federal investment, but much of it is going to swing states. That's my indictment of how it's being spent. But we are putting wind in the Gulf. That is coming. And they're trying to bring blue hydrogen in. That's coming. And they've come up with this magic, what I call white man juju, something called carbon capture, where they're professing to put the carbon underneath the ground, and then the companies are going to get tax credits. That is nothing but juju. That is false magic. It's not proven. And the first place they elected to come jam was to go into Lake Maupaw, a place where a lot of Tea Party people have their camps. And guess who's fighting against carbon capture? Those very same Tea Party people are saying, no, not in our swamp where we go hunt and fish. And there's 2 bills in the Louisiana legislature now that are up for vote to stop them from doing carbon capture in a sequestered area, Lake Maupaw. If carbon capture is going to work, put it underneath your plant. Why they don't put it underneath their plant? Because they're scared it might blow up.
That's right.
So now you want to go out into a sequestered area and put it. I'm sorry, I've got to go. I've enjoyed the conversation with you and Miss Arlie, and maybe we can talk again later when we have a related topic. But I really got to go catch this plane.
Okay.
Or I'm
Go
gonna be in
catch your
trouble.
plane. It was great. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. And I hope I get a chance to interview you when I'm in the Gulf region. Thanks, General Honoré.
We'll make that happen. Thank you.
Okay. Goodness. Arlie, are you still there?
Yes, I certainly am.
I want to ask you another question. Well, actually, two. What do you think of the lessons that the climate movement and the environmental movement should take from your book?
I think they should take from my book the basic idea there is a very urgent job ahead of us, and it's possible to do. This is not impossible. Many people say, oh, you know, I'm just one person. How can I change something like climate change? Not possible. No, go join a group. And that group can really make a big difference. And I see openings. As I was just saying, if you look at national surveys, there's crossover in people's attitudes. Hey, this is real. We can see, you know, the rains coming down, the hurricanes through the Midwest, the floods. I mean, Lake Charles, where I did this work, it's just a disaster, you know. Even still, it's not back on its feet. So it's the people at the other end. Don't think of them as enemies. Think of them who are people who are suffering the consequences of something, and who are likely to agree with you about renewables, agree with you that the government should be active on things. They won't agree with you on what's the cause of this. Oh, they'll be defensive. Oh, I'm an oil worker. Don't blame it on me. Isn't kind of a blame aversion. Okay, be a pragmatist. Set that aside. You're not there to wag your finger. You're there to solve an urgent problem. So those are takeaways from this, I think.
Yeah. Audience questions. Maddie, let us have some audience questions while we have time.
Yeah, we have some really great questions for you, Arlie. So the first one is from Kennedy on Facebook. And Kennedy says, Arlie, your book emphasizes a point that Jane makes quite often on Fire Drill Fridays, which is that we have to close the divide between the parties in order to make progress. My question is, how do we even begin to open up these conversations and keep them from becoming combative, especially when approaching difficult subjects like falling employment rates, health, environmental factors, you know, things that can be impacted by their vote?
Right. I think that one good approach is, let's say, to see what's going on. Who are the environmental people on the right? Do you know any? Have you been to a meeting of Christian Save the Planet group? And let's say, there is, I should back up to say, some 70 different crossover groups. These are volunteer groups, non-governmental groups with names like Living Room Conversations, which was begun here in Berkeley, California, where you get left and right together. I've done a number of those. One's called Hi from the Other Side. And in, say, Living Room Conversations, what you do is get left and right together, and you assign yourself a topic. You go in with the idea, and this is kind of a cultural intelligence all school children should be taught, that there's a way of talking with people where it's not a scoreboard and you're not out there to win. You're out there to offer yourself and to hear the stories from the other side with an idea for common ground. And if you were to, let's say, talk with someone on the right in Louisiana, chances are, for example, they'd be very pro-military. Okay, then you can say, hey, did you know that actually the Navy is way ahead of the game in renewables, doing a lot of innovative work? And you say, well, this is just a blue state plot. You could say, well, did you know that actually the leading states, which had the highest proportion of their electricity from renewable sources, are like South Dakota, and Texas is really big on wind. And there's this organization called the I don't know if we discussed this before, but the Tea Party.
The Green Tea Party?
The Green Tea Party, yeah. So that they're not alone in seeing that this is a real issue, and reasonable people on the other side, and take it step by step.
Wonderful, thank you. And we had a lot of similar questions to the one I just asked, but we also have a lot of people that would love your input on books, of course. So we have a question from Sharon on YouTube, who asks, Arlie, what books would you recommend for a teenage girl trying to understand climate change more clearly?
A teenage girl. Wow. May I get this person's email address? Because I don't have a ready
Absolutely.
answer, but I love the question. I really do.
Absolutely. Jane, do you have any thoughts on good climate change books?
I have to think about it, but the Sunrise Movement, I think, is a very good place to maybe consider joining. Those are young people, a lot of students who have built a great movement for the climate.
Absolutely. All right. So another question for you, Arlie, from Barbara on Facebook. What can we each do right now as individuals so that we can help make this planet a better one?
Well, you're off to a good start if you're right here with Jane Fonda and being introduced to innovations that are going on and join a group. I mean, Greenpeace is a good one, and there are regional centers. There's something called LEAN, LEAN, Louisiana Environmental Action Network, that's doing good work in the Gulf along Cancer Alley. You could, email, do you need some help? So I would reach out to such groups, get attached, and see if what you can do would help what needs to be done. Don't do it alone.
No, join an organization. Or as I'm going to say in a little while, you can go to firedrillfridays.com/take-action and find lots of things to do that are perfectly appropriate for a teenage man or woman, girl or boy.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Arlie. And Arlie, another question for you from James, who is watching on YouTube. Is there anything that you've learned since you wrote the book that you wish you could change or add?
Oh, wow. That's a beautiful question. Thank you. I found, let me just say, writing it transformative. I've been, exploring the world as a sociologist all my life, adult life. But this somehow putting myself in the company of people that I really had such profound differences with was transformative. And one guy, he's chapter 1, Mike Schaap once said, people on the left and right, you and me, we have the same kinds of minds and same kind of hearts, but we have different souls. And I thought, wow. And then I asked him, well, help me figure out how can we talk across souls? And there are pieces of these different souls that, that are bridges, and there can be respectful differences. I think we live with stories. And when I sat down at a living room conversation with a Republican who opposed regulating polluters, and he began with a story. Well, I had a friend who had a ranch and had a creek in it, and there was an endangered species in the creek, and he was not doing what needed to be done to mitigate the damage to the endangered species. And a man from the EPA arrived with a gun. Well, now, what are we learning here? I first thought, oh, you've got to be kidding. I mean, that's not how the EPA does. But that's what he reported as true. Okay, so if I had that story, well, I would feel more frightened of this thing I'm advocating. That what are the stories? Where do they come from? How did they get there? How can we negotiate stories? But you can't just talk at a story. You get backfires. We all know that. We have our own stories. And about the urgency of this very, very topic. So I guess what I would say is there's a lot to learn in how to encounter people on the other side. And a lot to learn from how to arrange for good encounters. With me, my last trip to Louisiana was a young man who has now started a high school program that brings Southern kids from public high schools in the South for a 3-week visit to high school kids in the North. He gets the kids on the coast to go inland and inland kids to go to the coast. They don't start with politics, but they would start a Google Meetup, what they had in common. And one woman said, one young gal who graduated from this said, you know, now I don't ask people, what do you believe? I ask them, where are you from?
Thank you, Arlie. You are so profound. Your book is so profound. And I think for me, the big lesson is the importance of approaching people with love, no matter who they are, no matter what they believe, as opposed to you. If we can truly see each other and hear each other's stories, not from some, I'm going to judge this, I know I don't like this person, but from our hearts, we can solve these problems. And unfortunately, we're running out of time and we can't take any more questions. Arlie, I'm so grateful to you and for your book and for your taking time to be with us today. Thank you. And the general has left, but we're very grateful to him too for sharing knowledge and insight. It was a really fascinating discussion. Thank you. And thanks to all of you wonderful firefighters out there for your questions. Stick around because in a moment, we're going to announce the winner of a copy of the book signed by Arlie and myself. But first, you know the drill. To make change, we have to take action. And today we're calling on President Biden to stop oil and gas exports. All these gas terminals in Louisiana and Texas, there's more than a dozen that are being built now. It's all for export. We have to stop export. We have to come back to the banning crude oil export that existed a few administrations ago. This is what is fueling a reckless expansion of oil and gas and petrochemicals in Louisiana and across the Gulf Coast. It's export, which in turn is exacerbating pollution, environmental injustice, and climate chaos. Go to firedrillfridays.com/take action to make your voice heard and become part of the Fire Drill Fridays family. Will you do that? Okay, let's find out who today's winner is. Anyone who entered a question for our guests, Arlie and the General, was entered for a chance to win a copy of Strangers in Their Own Land, signed by the author, Arlie Hochschild, and myself. And drum roll, please. Maddie, can you tell us who the winner is?
Yes, the winner is Barbara Goldberg. So Barbara, thank you so much for participating today. We're going to be reaching out to you via Fire Drill Fridays Facebook to get your details so we can send you the book.
Congratulations, Barbara. Thank you all of you for participating in our spring 2023 book club. Showing up is half the battle, right? Let's keep reading, learning, and most importantly, let's keep turning that learning into action together, okay? See you next time.